To be born into American royalty is to inherit a vault of gold and a prison of expectations in equal measure. The Wendel sisters understood this better than anyone. Rebecca, Josephine, Ella, Georgiana, Mary, and finally, Georgiana, 6 women who controlled the most valuable real estate empire in New York City, worth over $100 million by 1930. They owned entire blocks of Fifth Avenue, hundreds of tenements from which rent flowed like clockwork, in properties that stretched from the Battery to Harlem. But when Ella Wendel died in 1931, alone in her mansion at number 739 Fifth Avenue, the police found something nobody expected. The rooms were piled floor to ceiling with newspapers from 1880. The furniture was coated in decades of grime, and hidden inside cracker boxes, stuffed into mattresses, and sewn into the linings of rotting coats. They discovered over $2 million in cash and securities. The richest women in America had lived like paupers and died like ghosts. Chapter 1: The Man Who Built a Fortune on Fear. John Gottlieb. Wendel never trusted banks, lawyers, or anyone who smiled when they asked about his money. He arrived in New York from Germany in 1838 with nothing but a mason's tools and a spine made of iron. While other immigrants huddled in tenements and dreamed of going home, Wendel studied the city like a general studying a battlefield. He saw what others missed. Manhattan was an island with finite land and infinite ambition. Buy dirt, hold it, never sell. By 1850, he owned his first plot, a muddy corner lot in Lower Manhattan that cost him $800. He mortgaged everything he had to buy it. Then he did something strange. He did nothing with it. No development, no buildings, no profit. Just dirt sitting there, waiting. That people thought he was foolish. Land was meant to be used, not hoarded. But Wendel understood something deeper. The city would come to him. He just had to be patient enough to let it happen. And it did. Within 10 years, that corner lot was worth $10,000. He still did not sell. Within 20 years, $50,000. He still held on. The city crawled north like a slow fire, consuming farmland and forest, turning dirt into gold. Wendel bought every parcel he could, always with cash. Always under market value, always from desperate sellers who needed money faster than he did. He kept 2 sets of books, one for the tax collectors, full of creative undervaluations and convenient omissions. One for himself, locked in a safe only he could open, listing every property, every tenant, every dollar. He trusted no one to manage his holdings. Not a broker, not a lawyer, not even family. Every lease was negotiated personally. Every rent payment collected by his own hand. In every eviction notice signed with his own pen. By 1870, John Wendel owned over 300 properties scattered across Manhattan. Tenements in the Lower East Side where immigrants paid him $5 a month for rooms the size of closets. Warehouses near the docks where merchants stored goods and paid him percentages. Corner buildings on Broadway where shop owners leased storefronts and made him rich with their ambition. The rents flowed in every month like clockwork. $10,000, $20,000, $50,000. He reinvested every penny into more land, more buildings, more control. But wealth did not soften him, it hardened him. The more he accumulated, the more he feared losing it. He saw thieves everywhere. Lawyers were vultures waiting to pick his estate clean. Bankers were criminals with licenses. Business partners were parasites looking for an opening. Even his own employees, the handful of clerks he hired to manage paperwork, were watched with suspicion. He fired anyone who asked too many questions about his holdings. He paid poverty wages to ensure loyalty through desperation, not trust through generosity. His obsession with control extended beyond money. It consumed his entire life. He lived in a modest townhouse on Fifth Avenue, refusing to build the mansion his wealth could afford. He wore the same suit for years until it frayed at the cuffs. He ate simple food and drank nothing stronger than water. Extravagance was waste, and waste was sin. And then there were his children, 6 daughters and 1 son. The boy, John Jr., was the heir, the future custodian of the empire. But he died young, at 16, from tuberculosis. The loss shattered something in John Wendel that never healed. With his son gone, the dynasty had no male heir, no one to carry the name forward, no one he could trust to guard what he had built. So he did the only thing that made sense to him. He turned his daughters into guards. Chapter 2: The Daughters He Never Let Go. By 1870, John Wendel had built an empire, but he had also built a cage for his children. Rebecca, Josephine, Ella, Georgiana, Mary, and Georgiana. 6 names, 6 lives, 6 women who would never be allowed to live them. They grew up in the Fifth Avenue mansion their father finally built, a granite fortress with bars on the windows and locks on every door. From the outside, it looked like privilege. Silk dresses and private tutors and rooms filled with expensive furniture. But privilege without freedom is just a prettier prison. Their father's rules were absolute. No visitors, no friends, no suitors, no socializing beyond the bare minimum required by polite society. The sisters attended church on Sundays, always together, always chaperoned, always silent. They sat in the family pew at the back of the sanctuary and left before anyone could speak to them. They took brief carriage rides through Central Park, but only on weekdays when the paths were empty. They shopped for necessities, but only at stores their father approved, and only when accompanied by him or a trusted servant. Education was permitted, but only at home. Private tutors taught them reading, arithmetic, and enough French and German to appear cultured. But literature that discussed romance was forbidden. Philosophy that questioned authority was banned. History that celebrated rebellion was skipped. Their father curated their minds the way he curated his properties, keeping out anything that might inspire dangerous ideas like independence or desire. The mansion itself became their universe. 5 stories of marble and mahogany. 30 rooms filled with furniture so expensive it was never used. Chandeliers that sparkled over empty dining tables. Libraries stocked with books no one read. Parlors designed for entertaining guests who never came. The sisters wandered the halls like ghosts, moving from room to room with nothing to do and nowhere to go. Their father watched them constantly. He knew where they were at every hour. He inspected their correspondence, the rare letters they received from distant cousins or old family friends. He monitored their spending, demanding receipts for every purchase, interrogating them about every penny. He controlled their wardrobes, insisting on dark colors and modest cuts, in nothing that might attract attention or suggest vanity. He even controlled their meals, serving plain food in small portions, suspicious of excess in any form. But the cruelest rule was the one about marriage. It was never stated explicitly, never written down, but it was understood with absolute clarity. The Wendel daughters would never marry, not because their father forbade it outright, but because he made it impossible. Suitors were turned away at the door. The invitations to social events were declined. Any man who showed interest was investigated, his finances scrutinized, his motives questioned, his character assassinated in whispered conversations that ended with the same conclusion. He wants the money. They all want the money. And perhaps some did. The Wendel fortune was already legendary by the 1880s. Estimates placed their wealth at over $20 million, a staggering sum in an era when a working man earned $500 a year. Marrying a Wendel daughter meant marrying into one of the richest families in America. But John Wendel saw every potential husband as a thief, a parasite, a threat to the empire he had built with his own hands. He would not allow strangers to inherit what he had earned through discipline and sacrifice. So the sisters remained unmarried. Rebecca, the oldest, watched her 20s pass, then her 30s, then her 40s. Josephine stopped asking about dances and dinner parties. Ella stopped looking out the window at couples walking in the park. Georgiana stopped imagining a life beyond the mansion walls. Mary, the youngest, still dreamed sometimes, but even her dreams grew quieter each year. They became experts at smallness, at making themselves invisible, at finding contentment in routine and safety in sameness. They embroidered. They read approved books. They played piano for each other in the music room. They took tea at 4 o'clock every afternoon in the same parlor, using the same china, discussing the same topics: the weather, the servants, the condition of the rugs. They learned to live inside the boundaries their father had drawn, and after enough years, they forgot the boundaries were even there. But forgetting is not the same as accepting. Late at night, in the privacy of their rooms, some of them cried. Some of them stared at the ceiling and wondered what it would feel like to be touched by a man who loved them. Some of them imagined children, the sound of laughter in the empty halls, the warmth of a family that chose each other instead of being chained together by blood and money. Those thoughts were dangerous. They led nowhere. So the sisters learned to bury them, the way their father buried his money in safe deposit boxes and property deeds. They became custodians of their own trapped hearts, guarding the empire of their loneliness with the same ruthless discipline their father used to guard his fortune. And when John Gottlieb Wendel finally died in 1894, at the age of 81, his daughters stood around his deathbed and felt something they could not name. Relief, perhaps, or terror. Because freedom, when it comes too late, does not feel like freedom at all. It feels like falling. In Chapter 3, the day the tyrant died and nothing changed. When John Wendel died in 1894, his daughters were finally free, but they had forgotten what freedom meant. The funeral was small. A handful of business associates paid their respects, men who had dealt with John Wendel through gritted teeth and careful contracts. The sisters sat in black dresses in the front pew of the church, their faces hidden behind veils, their hands folded in their laps. They did not cry, and tears required permission they had never been given. The will was read 3 days later in the mansion library. The family lawyer, a stern man named Thomas Bennett, who had served John Wendel for 30 years, spread the documents across the desk and explained the terms in a voice that allowed no questions. The estate was valued at approximately $23 million, over 400 properties across Manhattan, tenements, warehouses, commercial buildings, undeveloped land, an empire of brick and mortar that generated rental income of over $1 million per year. It all went to the daughters, equal shares, no conditions, no stipulations, just a simple transfer of wealth from the dead to the living. Bennett waited for their reaction. Shock, perhaps, gratitude, relief. But the sisters sat in silence, their faces unreadable. Finally, Rebecca, the oldest at 52, spoke. "What do we do now?" The lawyer blinked. "You manage the estate, or you hire managers. You collect the rents, you maintain the properties, you live your lives." Rebecca looked at her sisters, then back at the lawyer. "We will continue as father would have wished." And that was that. No celebration, no discussion of change, no consideration of a different life. The sisters simply absorbed the fortune into their routines and kept living exactly as they had before. They hired no new staff. They made no new investments. They accepted no social invitations. And they did not redecorate the mansion or buy new wardrobes or travel to Europe the way wealthy women were expected to do. Instead, they became their father. They took over the management of the properties with the same obsessive control he had exercised. They reviewed every lease personally. They collected rents themselves or sent trusted servants to do it. They inspected buildings, checking for damage, for unauthorized modifications, for any sign that tenants were taking advantage. They kept the same 2 sets of books their father had kept, one for the tax collectors and one for themselves. But where their father's control had come from ambition and hunger, theirs came from fear. He had wanted to build. They wanted to protect. He had seen opportunity in every transaction. They saw threat. Every tenant was a potential thief. Every repair request was an attempt to defraud them. Every business proposal was a scheme to steal what was rightfully theirs. The paranoia that had been a personality trait in their father became a shared delusion among the sisters. They stopped trusting the banks, withdrawing large sums of cash to keep at home where they could see it. They stopped trusting the postal service, convinced that letters were being intercepted and read. They stopped trusting the household staff, firing longtime servants on suspicion of gossip or disloyalty. By 1896, only 2 years after their father's death, the mansion had become a fortress. New locks were installed on every door. Windows were fitted with additional bars. The sisters began keeping irregular hours, sleeping in shifts, convinced that burglars were watching the house, waiting for an opportunity. They stockpiled food in the pantry, buying in bulk and storing supplies as if preparing for a siege. They hoarded newspapers, saving every edition, creating piles that grew taller each month. Their lawyer, Thomas Bennett, tried to intervene. He visited the mansion and found the sisters sitting in a parlor that smelled of dust and old paper. He suggested they hire a property management firm to handle the day-to-day operations. He recommended they invest some of the cash reserves in stocks or bonds. He gently proposed they consider moving to a smaller, more manageable residence. They listened in silence. Then Rebecca stood and showed him to the door. "We are managing perfectly well," she said. "We do not require your advice." Yet Bennett never returned. He sent monthly reports and collected his retainer, but he stopped trying to save them from themselves. Other professionals made similar attempts. An accountant suggested they modernize their bookkeeping. A real estate broker offered to sell some of the less profitable properties. A distant cousin wrote a letter proposing a family reunion. All were politely but firmly refused. The sisters had made their choice. They would preserve their father's legacy by becoming living monuments to his philosophy. Frugality, distrust, control. They would guard the fortune he had built, not by using it or growing it, but by freezing it in place, like insects trapped in amber. And as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, as New York City exploded into modernity and excess, the Wendel sisters sealed themselves inside the past. They locked the doors. They drew the curtains. They stopped answering the bell. The mansion at 739 Fifth Avenue became a tomb for 6 women who were still breathing. The question no one asked was simple. If you inherit everything but change nothing, what have you really gained? The sisters could not answer because they had stopped asking questions. They had become what their father had always wanted them to be. Not daughters, not women, just custodians. Guards standing watch over a vault that would never be opened. Chapter 4. The Sister Who Tried to Escape. Mary Wendel was the only one who dared to dream of a life beyond the mansion walls. She was the youngest of the 6 sisters, born in 1868, 20 years after Rebecca. By the time Mary came of age in the 1880s, the patterns of the family had already hardened into ritual. But youth carries hope the way old age carries resignation, and Mary still believed she could be different. She met him at church. His name was Thomas Fanning, a clerk at a shipping company, respectable enough to avoid immediate suspicion, but not wealthy enough to erase it. He had kind eyes and a quiet voice and a habit of standing near the Wendel pew on Sundays, close enough to notice Mary, but far enough to avoid her father's glare. They never spoke, but their eyes met, again and again, week after week. And in those brief glances, Mary constructed an entire alternate life. She imagined walking beside him on Sundays after church. She imagined dinners with his family, laughter around a table crowded with siblings and cousins and children. She imagined a small house, modest and warm, filled with ordinary happiness. She imagined being called Mary Fanning instead of Mary Wendel. A new name, a new life, freedom. The fantasy sustained her through months of silence. But fantasies cannot survive on glances alone. In the spring of 1889, Thomas Fanning made his move. He sent a letter to the Wendel mansion addressed to Mary, yet requesting permission to call on her. The letter was formal, respectful, careful. He expressed admiration for her character and mentioned his steady employment and his prospects. He asked only for the opportunity to know her better. John Wendel intercepted the letter. He read it twice. Then he summoned Mary to his study. She stood before his desk, her heart pounding, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her father did not yell. He simply explained. This man, this Thomas Fanning, earned $1,200 per year. A decent wage for a clerk, perhaps, but a pittance compared to the Wendel fortune. What did Mary think such a man wanted? Love, or access to millions of dollars he could never earn on his own? Mary tried to defend him. She said Thomas was kind, honest, hard-working. She said he did not know about the family wealth. She said he had asked to call on her, not marry her, just to know her. But her father's expression did not change. He asked her a single question. If we had nothing, would he still want you? Mary could not answer, because she did not know. And in that silence, her father won. He forbade any contact. He instructed the household staff to turn Thomas Fanning away if he appeared at the door. He stopped taking Mary to church, claiming she was unwell, keeping her confined to the mansion for 3 months. When they finally resumed their Sunday attendance, Thomas Fanning was gone. He had taken a position with a shipping company in Boston and left New York entirely. Mary never learned whether he left because he was discouraged or because her father had paid him to leave. It did not matter. The outcome was the same. Her chance at escape had closed. But the wound did not heal. Mary stopped embroidering. She stopped playing piano. She spent hours in her room, staring at the walls, her mind circling the same questions. What if she had run away? What if she had defied her father and met Thomas in secret? What if she had chosen love over loyalty, desire over duty, risk over safety? Her sisters noticed. Rebecca tried to comfort her with platitudes about family obligation and the dangers of fortune hunters. Josephine reminded her that their father only wanted to protect them. Ella suggested they take a carriage ride to lift her spirits, but Mary refused their comfort. She withdrew into herself, nursing her grief like a secret. Then, in 1894, their father died. Mary was 26 years old, young enough to still dream, young enough to believe she could reclaim what she had lost. She asked Rebecca, now the de facto head of the family, for permission to travel. To Boston, perhaps. To visit a cousin she barely knew. To see something beyond the walls that had contained her entire life. Rebecca said no. Not because she was cruel, but because she was afraid. The family had to stay together. They had to present a united front. The world was full of people who would try to exploit them, to divide them, to steal from them. If Mary left, what would stop the others from leaving? And if they scattered, who would protect the fortune? Mary tried to argue. She was an adult. She had inherited millions. She could hire chaperones. She could travel safely. She could return whenever she wanted. But Rebecca's fear was contagious, and it spread to the other sisters. Josephine sided with Rebecca. So did Ella. So did Georgiana. Even Georgiana, the youngest after Mary, agreed. The family must stay together. Mary was outvoted, outnumbered, and something inside her broke. Not dramatically, not with screaming or tears, just a quiet, final surrender. She stopped asking for permission. She stopped imagining alternatives. She stopped looking out the windows at the world passing by. Instead, she turned inward, like her sisters, and found safety in routine. She took tea at 4 o'clock. She reviewed property ledgers. She inspected the household accounts. She became what they all became: a custodian, a guard, a woman who had forgotten how to want anything beyond the walls of her prison. Years later, in 1912, Mary Wendel died of pneumonia. She was 44 years old. She had never married, never traveled beyond New York, never kissed a man or held a child or lived a single day as herself instead of as her father's daughter. On her deathbed, delirious with fever, she called out a name. Thomas, just once. Then she was gone. Her sisters buried her in the family plot and said nothing about the name. They told themselves she had been happy, that she had lived a good life, that she had been protected from the pain and betrayal that came with trusting outsiders. They believed it because they had to. Because if Mary had died in despair, what did that mean for the rest of them? Chapter 5. The fortress becomes a tomb. By 1900, the Wendel mansion was no longer a home. It was a monument to fear. The building itself was still magnificent from the outside. 5 stories of gray stone rising above Fifth Avenue, its facade decorated with carved details and iron railings. Passers-by admired it. Architects pointed to it as an example of Gilded Age grandeur, but inside, the mansion was rotting. The sisters had stopped maintaining it. Not because they lacked money, they had millions in rental income flowing in every month. But spending money required trust, and trust was the one thing they could no longer afford. Hiring repairmen meant letting strangers into the house. Strangers meant risk. Risk meant potential theft, sabotage, betrayal. So they let the house decay around them. The roof developed leaks. Water stains spread across the ceilings of the upper floors, blooming like dark flowers. The sisters placed buckets beneath the drips and ignored the damage. The plumbing failed in the third-floor bathrooms. Instead of calling a plumber, they simply stopped using those rooms. The heating system broke down one winter, and rather than repair it, they burned coal in fireplaces and wore their coats indoors. The decay was not just physical, it was psychological. The sisters had divided the mansion into territories, each claiming certain rooms while abandoning others. Rebecca controlled the ground floor parlor and the front sitting room. Josephine claimed the library, and Ella took the second-floor drawing room. The upper stories, where bedrooms had once housed a full household, were left empty. Dust accumulated on the furniture. Cobwebs formed in the corners. The expensive drapes faded in the sunlight that no one drew them to block. And then there were the newspapers. The sisters had always saved newspapers, a habit inherited from their father, who believed information was valuable and should be archived. But after his death, the saving became hoarding, and they subscribed to every major New York publication: the Times, the Herald, the Tribune, the World. Every morning, the papers were delivered. Every morning, they were stacked in the hallways. Every day, the piles grew taller. By 1900, there were newspapers from 1890 stacked floor to ceiling in the second-floor hallway. By 1910, the stacks had spread to the third-floor landing. By 1920, entire rooms were filled with nothing but yellowing paper. The sisters walked through narrow pathways between the towers of newsprint, their movements constrained by the walls of their own accumulation. The hoarding extended beyond newspapers. They saved everything. Broken furniture that could theoretically be repaired someday. Clothes they no longer wore but might need in an emergency. Scraps of fabric, lengths of string, empty jars and bottles, receipts from purchases made 20 years earlier. The mansion became a museum of useless things, and every object imbued with imaginary value by women who could not bear to let anything go. But the most disturbing hoarding was the money. The sisters had always distrusted banks, but their paranoia intensified with each passing year. They began withdrawing large sums of cash, bringing it home in locked cases, hiding it throughout the mansion. $50,000 in a bedroom closet, $30,000 in a kitchen cupboard. Securities worth hundreds of thousands stuffed into mattresses, sewn into the linings of coats, hidden inside cracker boxes and biscuit tins. They could not remember where they had hidden it all. They forgot which drawer held the bonds, which coat concealed the cash, which box was empty and which was full. So they hid more, creating layers of concealment, a fortune scattered through the house like Easter eggs no one would ever find. Their paranoia about theft became all-consuming. They fired the remaining household staff and convinced that servants were stealing from them. They stopped answering the door, certain that visitors were thieves disguised as friends. They refused deliveries, forcing themselves to carry heavy parcels from stores rather than allow delivery men inside. They even suspected each other, quietly checking to ensure their personal hoards had not been touched. The isolation was total. By 1910, the sisters rarely left the mansion. They shopped for necessities only when supplies ran desperately low. They attended church sporadically, then not at all. They stopped receiving mail, letting letters pile up unopened in the front hall. The outside world ceased to exist for them. It was a threat, a source of danger, a place where people schemed to take what was theirs. Inside the mansion, their routines became rituals. They ate meals at the same times every day, consuming the same bland food prepared on a coal stove because the gas had been disconnected to save money. They reviewed their property ledgers at the same hour each afternoon, checking and rechecking figures that never changed. They sat in their designated rooms, alone, reading old newspapers or staring at walls, waiting for time to pass. Scale was impossible to ignore. The Wendel sisters owned over 600 properties across Manhattan by 1910. Their rental income exceeded $1.2 million per year. The estimated value of their real estate holdings was $80 million. They were among the 10 wealthiest families in America, and yet they lived in squalor. No running water on the upper floors. No heat in half the rooms. No electric lights because they refused to allow electricians inside. They ate stale bread and canned soup. They wore clothes until they fell apart. They lived in darkness and filth, surrounded by millions they were too terrified to use. The neighbors noticed. Complaints reached the police. The house smelled. Garbage piled up in the back courtyard. Rats were seen entering and leaving through broken basement windows. But when officers knocked on the door, the sisters refused to answer. And because they owned the property and paid their taxes, there was little anyone could do. The Wendel mansion became a neighborhood mystery, a blight, yet a Gothic monument to something nobody could quite name. What the neighbors did not know was that the sisters were not just afraid of the world. They were afraid of themselves, afraid of wanting more, afraid of breaking their father's rules, afraid that any change, any deviation from the patterns he had set would result in catastrophe. So they froze. They stopped living. They became statues guarding a fortune that guarded nothing but itself. Chapter 6. The world moves on without them. While the Wendel sisters locked themselves away, New York City exploded into the 20th century and left them behind. 1900. Automobiles appeared on Fifth Avenue, coughing exhaust and honking horns, replacing the horses and carriages the sisters remembered from their youth. Electric streetlights illuminated the night, turning darkness into perpetual twilight. The city hummed with energy, ambition, modernity. But inside 739 Fifth Avenue, if the sisters still lived by candlelight and gaslight, their world frozen in 1890. Skyscrapers rose around them. The Flatiron Building in 1902, 20 stories of steel and ambition. The Singer Building in 1908, 47 stories, briefly the tallest in the world. The Woolworth Building in 1913, 60 stories of Gothic revival grandeur, a cathedral to commerce. The skyline transformed, reaching upward, claiming the air itself as real estate. The Wendel sisters owned land beneath these monuments to progress, but they refused to develop it. Empty lots sat idle, generating no income, while the city built around them. The Jazz Age arrived. Flappers danced in speakeasies, hemlines rose, Women cut their hair and smoked cigarettes and voted. The war in Europe ended. Soldiers came home. The economy boomed. Fortunes were made overnight in stocks and speculation. The city pulsed with possibility. But the Wendel sisters did not dance, did not vote, did not celebrate. They did not even know there had been a war until it was over. Their properties generated enormous revenue, but they refused to modernize. Tenants complained about lack of repairs, broken pipes, peeling paint, faulty wiring. Some moved out. The sisters did not care. New tenants always appeared. The city was growing too fast. Demand exceeded supply. The Wendels could charge whatever they wanted and still fill every apartment, so they did nothing, collected rent, ignored complaints, let the buildings crumble. Their lawyer, Thomas Bennett, sent monthly reports that went unread. He suggested investments. The stock market was soaring. Industrial bonds offered guaranteed returns. Real estate development could multiply their wealth. But the sisters sent no reply. They wanted no changes, no risks, no growth, just preservation. The fortune their father had built must remain exactly as he had left it. But preservation without maintenance is just slow destruction. By 1920, several of their properties had been condemned by the city. Fire hazards, structural damage, health code violations. The sisters paid the fines rather than make the repairs. They viewed the fines as a tax on their right to do nothing. Then the deaths began, not all at once, one by one, a slow procession toward extinction. Rebecca died first in 1912 at the age of 70. She collapsed in the front parlor, alone, while reviewing a ledger. Her sisters found her hours later. They did not call a doctor. She was already gone. They buried her quietly in the family plot and said nothing to anyone. The newspapers did not notice. The city did not mourn. One of the richest women in America vanished without a headline. Josephine followed in 1916 at 68. Pneumonia brought on by living in an unheated house during a brutal winter. She died in her bedroom on the third floor, wrapped in blankets, shivering until she stopped. Her sisters placed her body in the parlor and sat with it for 2 days before finally notifying the authorities. Again, no public announcement, no funeral service, just a burial and silence. The pattern repeated. Each death shrank the circle. Each loss made the survivors more isolated, more paranoid, more convinced that the world was hostile and dangerous. Georgiana, the sister whose name was spelled differently for reasons no one remembered, died in 1918 during the influenza pandemic. She was 63. The disease swept through the city, killing thousands, but the Wendels did not learn about it until their sister was dead. They had stopped reading current newspapers, preferring instead to reread old editions from the 1880s. By 1920, only 3 sisters remained: Ella, Georgiana, and one other. The mansion had become a mausoleum. Entire floors stood empty. The smell of decay permeated everything. Mold grew on the walls. The plumbing had failed completely. The sisters used chamber pots that they emptied into the garden, adding to the stench that kept neighbors away. And still, the fortune grew. Rental income continued. Properties appreciated. By 1925, the Wendel estate was valued at over $90 million. The sisters were worth more than ever. It's sitting on mountains of cash they would never use, surrounded by properties they would never see, locked inside a prison they could not escape. The city tried to forget them. Newspapers stopped writing about the mysterious Wendel sisters. Society matrons stopped sending invitations. Even the distant relatives who had once hoped to inherit stopped visiting. The family had disappeared into itself, become a ghost story, an urban legend about old women and hidden gold. But legends persist because they contain truth, and the truth was this. The Wendel sisters had everything money could buy, and nothing money could not. They owned the city, but lived nowhere. They controlled millions, but possessed nothing. They were free to do anything, but knew only how to do one thing: hide. The question hanging over their final years was not whether they would die alone. That was certain. The question was whether they had ever truly lived. And if you spend 80 years guarding a fortune you never enjoy, protecting a legacy you never share, preserving a past you can never return to, what exactly have you accomplished? The sisters could not answer because they had stopped asking. They had become what their father made them: ghosts haunting their own lives, prisoners serving sentences that had no end. Chapter 7: The Last Two Standing. By 1920, only Ella and Georgiana remained, in two elderly women guarding a fortune they would never use. Ella was 78, Georgiana was 75. They were ancient by the standards of their time, bodies bent and fragile, minds sharp enough to remember, but too tired to care. They had outlived their siblings, their servants, their lawyer, and most of their generation. They were relics of a vanished world, the last speakers of a dead language called Wendel. The mansion had become unlivable in any conventional sense. In the front parlor, once elegant, was now piled with newspapers from floor to ceiling. The dining room table was buried under account books, property deeds, and scattered bundles of cash. The kitchen was functional only in theory. The stove worked, but they rarely used it, surviving instead on canned goods and stale crackers they bought in bulk and stored in the pantry until the tins rusted. They no longer slept in bedrooms. The stairs had become too difficult to climb. Instead, they slept in chairs in the ground floor sitting rooms, wrapped in blankets, dozing fitfully through the nights. The second and third floors were abandoned entirely, left to the rats and the rot. The upper stories had become storage for their hoarded newspapers, broken furniture, and hidden cash. The cash was everywhere. Ella and Georgiana could not remember where they had hidden it all. $50 bills stuffed into coat pockets, $100 certificates sewn into the linings of old dresses, bonds worth $10,000 folded inside cracker boxes, gold coins scattered in drawers, mixed with buttons and old keys. They had so much money concealed throughout the house that they occasionally discovered their own hoards and did not recognize them. The irony was brutal. They were worth over $90 million, but they lived in conditions worse than their poorest tenants. No running water, no heat, and no light after dark except candles. They wore the same clothes until they fell apart, then patched them with scraps. They ate food that had spoiled because they could not smell it anymore. They washed nothing, including themselves. The stench inside the mansion was overwhelming, a combination of decay, mildew, unwashed bodies, and rat droppings. Their paranoia had reached clinical levels. They believed the neighbors were spying on them, plotting to break in and steal the fortune. They believed the city government wanted to seize their properties. They believed the banks were waiting for them to die so they could claim the accounts. Every knock on the door was a threat. Every letter was a trap. Every stranger on the street was an enemy. They stopped going outside entirely. Groceries were delivered and left on the front steps. They waited until dark to retrieve them, moving like shadows, fearful of being seen. They stopped attending church, stopped paying social calls, stopped acknowledging the existence of anyone beyond themselves. The world shrank to the dimensions of the mansion, and the mansion shrank to the dimensions of their fear. But fear, like wealth, compounds over time. By 1922, Ella and Georgiana were no longer just afraid of thieves. They were afraid of each other. They slept in separate rooms with locked doors. They kept separate caches of cash. They checked their hiding places obsessively, convinced the other was stealing. Trust. The final bond between them had eroded into suspicion. They communicated in whispers and accusations. Georgiana claimed someone had moved her securities. Ella insisted her gold coins had been touched. They counted their money daily, matching figures against ledgers they had kept for decades, searching for discrepancies that proved betrayal. They found none. The missing money was imaginary. But imagination, when fed by isolation and paranoia, becomes indistinguishable from reality. The outside world occasionally intruded. Tax collectors sent notices demanding payment. The sisters paid, but resented it, convinced the government was stealing from them. The city sent inspectors to investigate complaints about the property's condition. The sisters refused to open the door, shouting through the mail slot that they would call the police if the inspectors did not leave. The police, when called, sided with the inspectors, but had no legal grounds to force entry. The standoff continued. Neighbors watched with a mixture of pity and disgust. Children dared each other to approach the mansion, running away screaming when they saw shadows moving behind the filthy windows. Adults complained to the city about the smell, the rats, the declining property values. But no one could penetrate the fortress. The Wendel sisters had sealed themselves away so completely that even concerned intervention became impossible. Inside, time stopped meaning anything. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months. The sisters lost track of dates, of seasons, of years. They knew only routine: wake, count money, check hiding places, eat, count money again, sleep, repeat. Their existence had become mechanical, stripped of joy, purpose, or connection. They were alive in the technical sense, but life had abandoned them long ago. The fortune continued to grow. Rent payments arrived. Properties appreciated. By 1924, the estate was worth $95 million. The numbers were staggering: over 600 properties, annual income exceeding $1.5 million, assets that placed them among the richest families in the nation. But the numbers were abstractions. They meant nothing. The sisters had stopped understanding what money could do because they had stopped imagining what life could be. Georgiana was the first to begin failing. Her mind remained clear, but her body was giving out. She could barely walk. Her hands shook constantly. She refused to see a doctor, convinced physicians were con artists who wanted to steal her jewelry. She had no jewelry. She had sold it all decades earlier and hidden the proceeds. But the fear remained. Ella watched her sister decline and felt nothing. Not pity, not grief. Just a distant awareness that soon she would be alone. Truly alone. The last Wendel, the final guardian of a fortune that had consumed 6 lives and produced nothing but misery. But even that realization did not change anything. Because change required hope, and hope required imagination, and imagination had been the first thing their father had taken from them. So Ella simply waited for Georgiana to die, for herself to die, for the fortune to pass to strangers who would fight over it like dogs over a bone. The end was coming. They both knew it, and neither of them cared. Chapter 8. The Death of Georgiana. When Georgiana Wendel died in her sleep in 1924, Ella did not call for help for 3 days. It happened on a Tuesday morning in March. Ella woke in her chair in the front sitting room, wrapped in a moth-eaten blanket, her joints aching from another night of half-sleep. She called out to her sister. No answer. She called again. Silence. Slowly, painfully, she stood and shuffled to the back parlor where Georgiana slept. Her sister was in her chair, head tilted back, mouth open. She looked asleep. But Ella knew the stillness was absolute, the absence of breath, the coldness already beginning to settle into the skin. Georgiana was gone. Ella stood in the doorway for a long time. Minutes. Maybe an hour. She did not cry. She did not scream. She just stared at the body of the last person in the world who had known her, really known her, and felt a void open inside her chest that had no bottom. Then she turned and walked away. She did not cover the body, did not close Georgiana's eyes, did not say a prayer or speak a farewell. She simply went back to her chair in the front room, wrapped herself in her blanket, and sat, waiting. For what, she did not know. 3 days passed. The body remained in the chair. Ella remained in hers. She did not eat, did not sleep, did not move except to use the chamber pot. She sat in silence, alone in the mansion, while her sister decomposed 15 feet away. The smell began on the second day, sweet and sickening. By the third day, it was unbearable. Finally, on Friday morning, Ella stood. She walked to the front door, unlocked it for the first time in months, and stepped outside. The sunlight hurt her eyes. The noise of the street, automobiles and voices, and the general chaos of the city overwhelmed her. She stood on the top step, swaying, gripping the iron railing for balance. A neighbor saw her and gasped. The old woman looked like a ghost, skin pale as paper, hair wild and matted, clothes hanging off a skeletal frame. The neighbor approached carefully, as if approaching a wounded animal. "Are you all right? Do you need help?" Ella's voice was a rasp. "My sister is dead." The neighbor called the police. Within an hour, officers arrived. They entered the mansion and found Georgiana in her chair, 3 days dead. They found the newspapers piled to the ceilings. They found the broken furniture, the rotting food, the chamber pots overflowing in corners. They found bundles of cash stuffed into drawers, securities hidden in coat pockets, gold coins scattered across the floor. They found squalor that defied comprehension in a house owned by one of the richest families in America. The officers wrapped Georgiana's body and carried it out. They asked Ella questions. When had her sister died? Why had she waited so long to report it? Was she injured? Did she need medical attention? Ella answered in monosyllables, or not at all. She sat in her chair, wrapped in her blanket, staring at nothing. A doctor was called. He examined Ella and declared her physically frail but mentally coherent, severely malnourished, dehydrated, suffering from neglect, but not incapacitated, not legally incompetent, just old and alone and broken. The police wanted to remove her from the mansion, take her to a hospital, or a home for elderly women, somewhere clean, somewhere safe. But Ella refused. "This is my home," she said. "I will not leave." And because she was lucid, because she owned the property, because there was no legal grounds to force her, they let her stay. They cleaned up the worst of the filth, removed the body, opened the windows to air out the stench. Then they left her there, alone in the mansion, with her newspapers and her hidden cash and her memories of 5 dead sisters. The funeral for Georgiana was small. A handful of distant relatives attended, people Ella barely recognized. They stood in the cemetery and said polite things about family and legacy and loss. Then they approached Ella, these strangers with Wendel blood, and asked careful questions about the estate. Who would inherit? Had Georgiana left a will? Was Ella planning to sell any of the properties? Ella stared at them with eyes that had seen too much and felt too little. She said nothing, just turned and walked away. She took a taxi back to the mansion, climbed the steps, locked the door behind her, and never left again. The death of Georgiana broke something fundamental in Ella. Not her mind, not her body, something deeper, the thread that connects a person to the world. The belief that existence matters, that being alive has purpose, that there are reasons to continue. Georgiana had been her last witness. The only person who remembered their childhood, their father, and the years before the fortune became a prison. With her gone, Ella's entire life became unmoored. She was the sole survivor of a story no one else could verify. And if no one remembers your life, did you really live it? The neighbors watched the mansion with renewed concern. No one came or went, no deliveries, no visitors, just silence. Weeks passed, months. The house seemed abandoned, but occasionally someone would see movement behind a window. A shadow, a flicker. It's proof that the old woman was still in there. Still alive, still alone. What they did not see was the descent, the complete withdrawal from even the pretense of living. Ella stopped eating regularly, stopped washing, stopped changing her clothes. She wandered the mansion like a ghost, moving from room to room, checking her hiding places, counting her money, talking to sisters who were no longer there. She had conversations with Rebecca about property management, debated with Josephine about whether to repair the roof, asked Mary if she was happy. The responses came from her own voice, but she heard them as separate, distinct, real. The mansion filled with ghosts, not supernatural, just psychological. The accumulated presence of a lifetime spent in the same rooms with the same people until the walls absorbed their voices. And beneath the madness, beneath the delusion, was a simple truth. Ella was dying, not quickly, not mercifully, but slowly. It's inch by inch, day by day, consumed by the fortune she had spent her life protecting. She had become what her father always wanted, the perfect guardian, loyal to the end, incorruptible, unchanging, dead inside. Chapter 9. Ella, alone in the dark. For 7 years, Ella Wendel lived as the sole heir to $100 million, and she lived like a beggar. The mansion became a labyrinth of decay. Without Georgiana, Ella stopped even the minimal maintenance they had performed together. Pipes burst and flooded rooms. She walked around the puddles. Windows broke in storms. She ignored them. The roof leaked so badly that rain poured through the ceiling and created waterfalls in the hallways. She placed buckets beneath them and let them overflow. The newspapers continued to pile up. Deliveries arrived daily, left on the front steps. Ella retrieved them at night and added them to the towers that now filled every room. By 1928, the ground floor was almost impassable. Narrow pathways wound between walls of yellowing paper. The smell of mildew and rot was suffocating. But Ella did not notice. Her senses had dulled. The world existed only as routine. She hoarded cash with increasing desperation. Every month, she walked to the bank, a journey that took hours because she moved so slowly. She withdrew large sums, 10,000, 20,000, 50,000. She carried it home in a satchel, terrified that someone would rob her, her eyes darting at every passing stranger. Then she hid it, in cracker boxes, in the linings of coats, in mattresses, in jars buried in the garden. She forgot where she hid it. The mansion had become a treasure map with no key, hundreds of thousands of dollars scattered throughout the house, hidden so well that even she could not find it. She would discover a bundle of cash in a drawer and have no memory of putting it there. She would open a tin of crackers and find bonds worth $20,000. Her own hoards became surprises. The scale of her wealth was staggering. By 1930, the Wendel estate was valued at over $100 million. Over 600 properties across Manhattan. Rental income of nearly $2 million per year. She was one of the richest women in the world. And she lived in filth. No running water. No electricity. No heat. She wore the same dress for months until it was black with grime. She ate spoiled food from cans she could not open properly, using a rusty knife to pry off the lids, cutting her hands in the process. The cuts became infected. She wrapped them in dirty rags and kept going. She stopped bathing entirely. Her hair became a matted nest. Her skin developed sores. Her teeth fell out. Her body shrank until she was skeletal, a walking corpse shuffling through a mansion of ghosts. But she did not see herself. There were no mirrors, and if there had been, she would not have looked. The isolation was total. She had not spoken to another human being since Georgiana's funeral in 1924. 7 years of silence. She talked to herself, to her dead sisters, to her father. Long conversations about property values and tenant complaints and the best places to hide cash. She argued with ghosts, made deals with phantoms, lived entirely inside her own head. The neighbors called the police periodically. The smell was unbearable. Rats infested the property, spreading to adjacent buildings. The city sent inspectors, but Ella refused to open the door. She screamed through the walls that they were thieves, that she would defend her property, that they had no right to enter. The inspectors left. What else could they do? A lawyer attempted to visit. Thomas Bennett had died years earlier, but the firm he had worked for still managed the Wendel accounts. They sent a young attorney to check on Ella, to ensure she was competent, to verify she understood the estate's affairs. He knocked on the door for 30 minutes. No answer. He returned the next day, and the next. Finally, he gave up. Sent a report stating that the client was unreachable but presumed alive. The firm continued collecting its fees and filing the necessary paperwork. That was all they could do. Inside the mansion, time ceased to function. Days were indistinguishable. Seasons changed, but Ella did not notice. She lived by candlelight because she had run out of lamp oil years ago. She woke when she woke, slept when she slept. There was no structure, no schedule, no reason for any of it. Her mind deteriorated. Not Alzheimer's, not dementia in the clinical sense. Just the slow erasure of a self that had never fully formed. She forgot her own name sometimes, called herself by her sister's names, believed she was her father, and spent hours reviewing property ledgers from 1880, convinced they were current, making notes about tenants who had been dead for 50 years. But beneath the madness, a part of her remained aware, a small, trapped voice that understood what had happened. That saw the absurdity, the tragedy, the waste. That voice whispered sometimes, late at night, when the mansion was silent and the ghosts were quiet. You did this to yourself. You chose this. You could have left, and you could have sold the properties, taken the money, and lived. You could have been free. But that voice was always drowned out by the louder one, her father's voice. Protect the fortune. Trust no one. Never sell. Never spend. Guard what we built. Die on the pile if you must, but never let them take it. And so she guarded, alone, in the dark, surrounded by more money than she could count, living in poverty no one could believe. She became a myth, a ghost story, the mad heiress of Fifth Avenue, and people walked past the mansion and invented stories. She had murdered her sisters for the inheritance. She was a witch. She was already dead, and her ghost haunted the house. None of the stories were true, and all of them were. In March 1931, Ella Wendel stopped moving. She sat in her chair in the front room, wrapped in her filthy blanket, and simply stopped. Not a heart attack, not a stroke, just a cessation. Her body, after 90 years of use and 7 years of abuse, gave up. She died alone. No one held her hand. No one spoke words of comfort. No one even knew she was dying. She sat in her chair, surrounded by towers of newspapers and hidden cash, and faded. The last Wendel, the final guardian, dead. It took 3 days for anyone to notice. The smell, already terrible, became unbearable. A neighbor finally called the police. Officers forced the door open and found her. Ella Wendel, heiress to $100 million, dead in a chair in a mansion that looked like it had been abandoned for a century. Chapter 10. The discovery that shocked New York. When police entered 739 Fifth Avenue, they found a mansion that looked like it had been abandoned for 50 years. The first officers through the door gagged on the stench. Decomposition, rot, mildew, human waste. They tied handkerchiefs over their faces and moved carefully through the front hall. Newspapers were piled floor to ceiling. The walls were stained with water damage. The floor was sticky with something unidentifiable. Rats scattered at their approach. They found Ella in the front sitting room, dead in her chair. Her body was skeletal, clothed in rags. Her face was wizened, unrecognizable. The officers called the coroner, then began exploring the rest of the house. What they discovered would make headlines across the nation. Every room was filled with newspapers, not stacks, towers, mountains, in decades of daily editions compressed into geological layers. The oldest papers dated to 1880, 51 years of accumulation. The weight of the paper had caused structural damage. Floors sagged, ceilings bowed. The house was on the verge of collapse from the sheer mass of newsprint. And then they found the money. It started with a drawer in the kitchen. An officer opened it looking for identification and found bundles of cash. $50 bills, hundreds, $1,000 notes. When he called his partner, they opened another drawer. More cash, a cupboard, securities worth $10,000, a cracker box on a shelf, gold coins. They searched systematically, every drawer, every closet, every coat pocket, every tin. The money was everywhere, sewn into mattresses, hidden in the linings of coats hanging in closets, stuffed into old shoes, buried in flour jars, concealed inside hollow bedposts. The mansion was not a home. It was a vault with no lock. The final tally took weeks to compile. Over $2 million in cash and securities were recovered from the mansion. $2 million in an era when the average worker earned $1,500 per year. A fortune within a fortune, hoarded by a woman too afraid to spend it. But that was just the beginning. The real wealth was in the properties. The Wendel estate owned 607 parcels across Manhattan, entire blocks of Fifth Avenue, hundreds of tenements in the Lower East Side, as commercial buildings in Midtown, warehouses near the docks, undeveloped land in Harlem. The properties alone were valued at $98 million. Add the cash, the securities, the personal assets, and the total exceeded $100 million. Ella Wendel had been one of the 5 richest women in America, and she had died in squalor that shocked even the police officers who worked in the worst slums of the city. The newspapers exploded with the story. Front-page headlines, photographs of the mansion's interior, descriptions of the filth, the hoarded cash, the wasted life. Journalists invented narratives. Ella had been insane, paranoid, a victim of her own greed. None of them understood the truth. She had not been greedy. She had been terrified. Fear, not greed, had driven her into isolation and madness. The public was fascinated and horrified. How could someone with so much live with so little? Why had no one intervened? Where was the family, the friends, but the authorities? The questions came too late. Ella was dead. Her sisters were dead. The entire family was extinct. And the fortune they had guarded so desperately was about to be devoured by strangers. Within days of the discovery, the claims began. Letters arrived at the law firm handling the estate. Telegrams, phone calls, people claiming to be relatives, distant cousins, descendants of forgotten aunts and uncles, childhood friends of the sisters. Anyone with a plausible connection to the Wendel name emerged from obscurity, hoping for a piece of the fortune. By the end of the first month, over 500 claims had been filed. By the end of the year, over 2,000. People came from across America, from Europe, from as far away as Australia. They brought family trees, birth certificates, letters, photographs, anything that might prove a connection, no matter how tenuous. The vast majority were fraudulent, con artists, opportunists, young people who had never met the Wendels, never visited the mansion, never even heard the name until they read about the fortune in the newspaper. But proving fraud took time, and lawyers, and money. The estate that Ella had died protecting was about to be consumed by the very vultures she had feared her entire life. The irony was brutal and complete. The sisters had lived in paranoia, convinced that everyone wanted to steal their fortune. They had sacrificed everything to protect it, and in the end, their fears came true. Not because they failed to guard the money, but because guarding it was all they did. Chapter 11, The Heirs Who Never Knew Them. Over 2,000 people came forward, claiming to be relatives of the Wendel sisters. None of them had ever visited. The legal battle lasted nearly a decade. The surrogates court of New York became a circus. Lawyers for the estate faced an endless parade of claimants, each with a story, a family tree, and a conviction that they deserved a share of the fortune. Most were lying. Some believed their own lies. A few were actually related, but had never bothered to contact the sisters while they were alive. The most infamous case was Morris Wendel. He appeared in court in 1932, claiming to be the long-lost son of a brother the Wendel sisters never had. He brought documents, photographs, witnesses who swore they knew him as a child. He was articulate, convincing, desperate. The court listened for weeks. Then investigators dug deeper. Morris Wendel was actually Morris Pedalowski, a failed actor from Pennsylvania who had fabricated the entire story. He was arrested for perjury and fraud, sent to prison. But he was not alone. Dozens of similar cases followed, each more elaborate than the last. The legitimate heirs, the actual distant relatives who could prove their connection through genealogy and documentation, numbered around 30. Most had never met the Wendel sisters. Some did not even know the sisters existed until the news broke. They had lived ordinary lives, working jobs, raising families, unaware that they were related to one of the richest families in America. These legitimate heirs divided the estate, but not before the lawyers took their share. Legal fees consumed over $20 million. $20 million spent arguing over who deserved the money, who had the better claim, who could prove the closest blood connection. The lawyers grew rich fighting over the corpse of a fortune that had destroyed the family that built it. The properties were sold, block by block, building by building. The Wendel empire, accumulated over 80 years, was dismantled in less than 5. Developers bought the land and tore down the old structures, replacing them with modern buildings. The tenements were emptied, the warehouses demolished, the undeveloped lots filled with skyscrapers. The mansion at 739 Fifth Avenue was sold to a real estate company. They gutted it, removed the newspapers by the truckload, scraped the filth off the floors, tore out the rotting plumbing and wiring. Then they demolished the entire structure. In its place, they built a glass and steel office tower. Modern, efficient, profitable. No trace of the Wendels remained. Not a plaque, not a marker. Just empty air where a family had died. The money that had been hidden throughout the mansion, the $2 million in cash and securities, was distributed among the heirs. Most of them spent it quickly. New houses, new cars, vacations, business ventures that failed, investments that collapsed. Within 20 years, most of the heirs had burned through their inheritance and returned to ordinary lives. The fortune that had taken 3 generations to build and 1 generation to guard was gone in less than 1. But a few of the heirs asked questions. They wanted to know about the sisters. What were they like? Why did they live that way? What happened to them? The lawyers had no answers. The estate's records contained only financial documents, property deeds, tax returns, bank statements, nothing personal, nothing human. The Wendel sisters had lived lives so private, so isolated, that they left no trace beyond their money. One heir, a distant cousin named Margaret, visited the site where the mansion had stood. She looked up at the office tower, its windows reflecting the sky, and tried to imagine 6 women locked inside the building that had stood there before. She could not. The gap between the sisters' lives and the modern world was too vast. They had become incomprehensible, ghosts from another century. Margaret did find one artifact. In an antique shop in Brooklyn, she discovered a small painting that had hung in the Wendel mansion. A landscape, of mountains and trees. Peaceful, beautiful, the kind of place the sisters never visited. She bought it for $50 and hung it in her living room. It was the only piece of the Wendel fortune she kept. The rest she donated to charity. She did not want the weight, the curse, the responsibility of money that had consumed 6 lives and produced nothing but misery. The final accounting of the estate came in 1940. After legal fees, taxes, and distribution to heirs, the Wendel fortune had been completely dispersed. $100 million gone, divided among strangers, spent by lawyers, absorbed by the state. The empire John Gottlieb Wendel had built with ruthless discipline and his daughters had guarded with pathological devotion had vanished as if it had never existed. But the story survived. Newspapers revisited it periodically. The mad heiresses who died in filth, the hidden fortune in cracker boxes, the mansion filled with newspapers. It became a cautionary tale, a parable about greed. Except it was not about greed. It was about fear, about control, about the prison that wealth can become when it is guarded instead of used, protected instead of shared, hoarded instead of lived. The lesson was simple but profound. Money is not safety. Accumulation is not achievement. And a fortune that consumes your life is not a fortune at all. It is a sentence. And the Wendel sisters served it to the end. Chapter 12, The Ghosts of Fifth Avenue. Today, the Wendel mansion is gone, replaced by a glass tower where tourists pass without knowing the story beneath their feet. The building at 739 Fifth Avenue is anonymous. Steel and glass. Offices and conference rooms. Receptionists and coffee machines. Thousands of people enter and exit every day. None of them know that beneath the marble lobby, 6 women once lived and died in isolation, so complete it erased them from history. The city has no memory. New York devours its past and builds on the bones. The Wendel fortune, so carefully accumulated and desperately guarded, left no mark. The properties were sold and redeveloped. The mansion was demolished. The money was spent. Even the graves of the sisters are neglected, overgrown with weeds in a cemetery no one visits. But their story persists, not because it is unique. Families destroy themselves with wealth all the time, but because it distills a universal truth into its purest form. Inheritance without purpose is a curse. Control without joy is imprisonment. And safety pursued to its logical extreme becomes indistinguishable from death. John Gottlieb Wendel built an empire. His daughters inherited it, and the empire devoured them, not through cruelty or malice, but through the simple mechanism of their own fear. They believed the fortune needed protection. They were right. But what they did not understand was that protecting the fortune meant sacrificing themselves. And in the end, the thing they protected consumed them entirely. The void they tried to fill was safety. They wanted to be secure, untouchable, protected from the world's dangers and betrayals. So they built walls, physical walls around the mansion, psychological walls around their hearts, financial walls around their wealth. They built and built until the walls became a prison and the prison became a tomb. And what did they gain? Nothing. They owned 600 properties and lived in one. They controlled millions and spent nothing. They had the resources to do anything and chose to do nothing. They were among the richest women in America and died as paupers, surrounded by cash they were too afraid to use. The The psychological inheritance was more powerful than the financial one, and John Wendel did not just pass money to his daughters. He passed paranoia, distrust, the conviction that the world was hostile and everyone was an enemy. That inheritance shaped their lives more completely than any dollar amount ever could. They could have sold the properties, taken the money, and lived free. But freedom required trust, and trust was the one thing their father never gave them. The tragedy is not that they were rich and unhappy. Plenty of wealthy people are miserable. The tragedy is that they were never allowed to try anything else. From childhood, they were trained to be custodians, guards, protectors of a legacy that was never theirs to enjoy. They inherited not opportunity, but obligation, not possibility, but duty. And they fulfilled that duty so completely that it killed them. Philosophers and historians study the Wendel case as an extreme example of wealth pathology. Psychologists analyze it as collective trauma. Economists point to it as a failure of capital allocation. But beneath all the analysis is a simpler truth. The sisters were human. They were lonely. They were afraid. And they did not know how to be anything else. If you walk past 739 Fifth Avenue today, you will see nothing unusual. Just another building in a city full of buildings. But if you stop for a moment, close your eyes, and imagine you can almost see them. 6 women standing at the windows and looking out at a world they owned but could never touch, trapped behind glass, behind money, behind the walls of their own making. The cracker boxes full of cash, the ones police found scattered throughout the mansion, were eventually emptied and disposed of. But one survived. It sits in a museum now, a small cardboard box with faded printing, displayed behind glass with a placard that explains its significance. This box once contained $2,000 in cash and hidden by Ella Wendel in the kitchen of her mansion. It was discovered after her death in 1931. People walk past it without stopping. It is just a box, but for those who know the story, it is something more. It is a symbol, a relic of American madness. Proof that you can own everything and possess nothing. That wealth without joy is poverty by another name. That the greatest fortunes can produce the loneliest lives. The final question hangs in the air like a ghost. Oh, if you own everything but live like nothing, what do you really possess? The Wendel sisters could not answer because they never asked. They inherited the question along with the money, but they were too afraid to examine either. So they just held on, and held on, and held on, until their fingers went numb and they forgot what they were holding and why. And when they died, the fortune they had, guarded so desperately, scattered like dust, consumed by strangers, spent by lawyers, absorbed by a city that never pauses long enough to remember. The empire is gone. The mansion is gone. The sisters are forgotten. All that remains is the story, and the question, and the cracker box, empty now, sitting in a museum, asking everyone who sees it the same thing. What are you holding on to? And is it worth your life?